Good morning, everyone. You're very welcome to this AAI Toolkit webinar, which focuses on an extraordinary piece of work entitled Sign of the Times. This has been developed by Behaviour and Attitudes, and the results of this survey were published by the Irish Times at the end of March. The survey was covered by Fintan O'Toole, Jennifer O'Connell, Conor Pope, Maureen Gaffney, as well as contributions from the B&A by Ian McShane, the chairman, and Luke Reaper, the managing director. Behaviour and Attitudes is one of Ireland's leading research and insight agencies. Testament to their work is their 26 Excellent in Research Awards from the Marketing Society of Ireland, which includes 5 Grand Prix. The B&A philosophy is that all research should be framed within the broader societal and cultural context, and without this understanding, true insight cannot be delivered. It was against this background that in 2010, B&A launched its first Sign of the Times report. If you have any questions, please use the chat box and we will address these at the end of this toolkit. Brian Roach from Owens DDB is the other face you see on screen, and he's in charge of the tech for this session. Now I'm delighted to hand you over to Luke Reaper, Managing Director of Behaviour and Attitudes, who will present the 12th in this series of Sign of the Times. Luke.
That's great. Good morning, everybody. We're delighted to be presenting, I suppose, 12th in the series today. The charts that you see will be available. We'll have those available for everybody, so you don't have to furiously take notes on that, and there's some extra bits and pieces in the background that I won't show today on that. So how the flow will go, I'll probably talk for about 30 minutes, and then we'll take questions. As Barry said, you can use the chat box there, and the guys will collate the questions, and then let's get through them, as many of them as possible at the end. So the flow is, I suppose we'll talk a little bit about a number of different themes. One is, I suppose, a little bit of a snapshot of the economy, where we stand at the moment. And this, I suppose what we're terming, I suppose, cautious release, yeah? And that, and there's been a lot of talk about, oh, there's loads of savings pent up and people will unleash this and we'll all be back to normal in no time and that. But nothing is as simple as that. There's various shades of grey in there, and we'll talk a little bit about that. We'll talk a little bit about contrasting realities. I suppose, look, the experience of lockdown, I know everyone's saying we're all in it together, we've all experienced the same thing. It hasn't. The experience has been quite different for many of us, and we'll talk a little bit about that, because that frames where people are coming from as we emerge from this. I suppose the other side of the thing was that, what do people want as we move forward, and that it's essentially normal but better. That a lot of what we went before wasn't perfect. We know that and we realize that, and so we want the best of both, and we'll talk a little bit about that. The pandemic has exposed, I suppose, human needs at its core, and that's a key aspect, to understand, I suppose, essentially what are the key needs and what is actually important in our lives now. There's new definitions of health and work and that, and which trends are emerging in there. We'll talk a little bit about that. And our horizons have shrunk as well. We spent more time at home, and we're talking more about working from home and so forth as the future and that. There's an evolving purchasing psychology as well. There's a new reason to buy. There's new considerations when buying. We'll talk a little bit about that. And obviously, no presentation would be complete without talking about sustainability. And then talk a little bit about post-COVID behaviour. Obviously, the holy grail. We all want to know what will stick and what's sticky and that. But there's some indications here about where things are going into the future, and then some parting thoughts in terms of implications for society and brands at the end. So look, won't bore you in terms of how we actually did it, but it's a purpose-built piece of research which we conduct every year. We have done since 2010. It involves insightful qualitative research to delve deeper in terms of this year was obviously online groups and more ethnography, and also thank you to, I suppose, a number of nimble businesses which we and in innovative emerging businesses which granted us interviews as well. Those being Gym and Coffee, Drop Chef, The Kind, and Blind Pig. Also, we had a very comprehensive online study as well, which we conducted actually in February and in terms of May as well, in terms of tracking that, and obviously our ongoing consumer confidence, which is conducted monthly as well since the pandemic hit on that. And we also always try and use new innovative technologies like OpinionX, which was a DCU startup, and that was crowdsourcing a tool in terms of research on that. So a variety of different, so it's grounded, I suppose, in some solid research in terms of everything we'll talk about here today. So just look, well, first off, a snapshot of the economy, where things are going in that. And I know the audience here today has a good understanding about the current zeitgeist, but just, I think it's no harm to reflect on a couple of things. One is, I suppose, consumer confidence, as you say, took a massive dip in April of last year, not surprising. And then we see there, in terms of looking forward in terms of the green versus the current, I suppose, consumer confidence, and that in terms of the net difference between better or worse people in terms of perceiving the economy into the future versus currently. So in terms in the future, and that, as we see in the green line there, we see it's been a journey, a rocky road in terms of through COVID, but we are on an upward curve at this particular stage of that. So we're still in the minus territory in terms of people think it'll be worse than better in the year ahead in that. But it's interesting that it is started moving upwards and that as restrictions lift and that, which is great. And every time restrictions lift a little bit more confidence. It's as you'd expect. A couple of things to point out though. First of all, our outlook, while we're at minus 24, the actual global outlook is minus 37. So Ireland punching above its weight in terms of that, which is good. So our people feel that we're on, I suppose, maybe a little better trajectory than they see around the world, which is great. And also the other interesting element is the divide, yeah. And we'll talk a little bit about divide throughout. There is a bit of a fragmentation of society. And interesting enough, we saw this coming through pre-pandemic as well, in terms of the vote for change and that. And this is still coming through here in this. Even in terms of the economy and that, and looking forward versus outside. Dublin doing better than outside Dublin, and that is a key pattern that we're seeing throughout this. The other side of things is when we're looking at over the last year, the financial reality has become more polarized, whereby we had a lot of people saying in terms of basically the amount of money, disposable income in their pockets was about the same as the previous year in 2020. Now we're seeing a much more polarized sort of society where we're seeing more having and more having not, yeah. So, and not surprising, a little bit more Dublin, a little bit more BBC Ones in terms of the more having, yeah. So there is that polarization, and we have more people in society saying they're getting by as opposed to living comfortably as we had before in that. So middle classes and those in Dublin are more likely to have more money in their pockets compared to last year. But a little bit more of saying getting by as opposed to living comfortably, and that's so there's that sort of nervousness and cautiousness there and that. And if you think about, I suppose, the role of media and that have to play in that, there's a lot of talk when there's talk about, for example, our unemployment levels ending at the end of the year, perhaps at around 16%. We are in the territory of the 80s, yeah, in terms of, I think, around the mid 80s and that, so that is, driving this sort of cautiousness, yeah, in terms of consumers and that. And I think we need to understand as well that there's some people have anxiety about their income. You have about a quarter of those working think that maybe the salary might decrease. You've a polarization in terms of people being financially impacted by the pandemic. Some, about just over a third agree, a third disagree, and that's sort of that polarization. And we have to remember that as a society, we're, depending on your age, it's your second recession or your third for some. So it's a lot of the people out there have experienced past experiences and will draw on those experiences. And if you remember, 2010, 2009, 2012, it wasn't long ago, and we can draw to that well of experience in that. And they are noticing increases in terms of the costs of goods and services, and they are conscious about how they'll spend their money nowadays and that, So all of that as a background delivers that sort of caution as we sort of move out of the depths of this pandemic into a more normal sort of society and that, but there is that pent-up demand for release, yeah? So notwithstanding that cautiousness, yeah, there is that demand for release. We can't, wait to get out there and to experience some of the elements that we had before, meeting our friends, getting back to social life, going to pubs and restaurants and that, and even in terms of holidays into the future and that, So there are a desire to blow off steam, there's overdue rituals in terms of getting married, buying a house, and those are elements of that, and in terms of confirming our sort of our relationships. And that's so it is one of cautious release, we would suggest, as we move out of this this pandemic and that. And we'll come back to some of that a little bit later on. Just in terms of contrasting realities, some people have been, not everybody has experienced the same things over the last year and that. It is about contrasting realities. In terms of our day-to-day lives, some people have benefited in terms of no more commutes, having that extra quality of time at home and so forth and that, but others have been overwhelmed in terms of their day-to-day lives. As this quote was, I find I have less time now. I never have a free minute to myself. I'm up with the kids all day working, and it's just exhausting. So you have that sort of tension, in society in terms of the contrasting realities over the last year and that. And also it's one of shifting habits as well. Some people have been very good at developing new routines and that. And geez, certainly it was the year of the dog. And we have to, some of our clients will say a dog is not just for COVID, it has to be looked after afterwards. And how will that happen if people are going back to the office and that? But we'll come back to that a little bit later on. So some people have been very good at this, whereas others have struggled, as like something you struggle to adapt to this. As one person, I find myself floating through the day at work and then straight to the couch in the evening time. And it's constant, always been on. And that, and then others with no routines or whatever it's been very profound in terms of the impact for people in that. Just in terms of who feels the impact of COVID-19 most in that. Well, it's interesting, when we look at this, so half of people feel that COVID-19 has a profound impact on their lives and that, and when we look at it by age, kind of interesting, the 55 plus age cohort, probably, or the 50 plus age would have had to deal with harsher controls and isolation, but it's actually the younger people who've felt more strongly that the pandemic has a profound impact on their lives and that. And why is that? Because I suppose milestones have been impacted, college graduations, relationships, this is social, and indeed they go out more essentially, and that. So the hit from them has been very, very profound, and very, very, very impactful. And indeed, they have borne the brunt of a lot of job losses and unemployment as well. We have to remember that. But it's not surprising, I suppose, that 85% are looking forward to some return to normality. And I do have to say I do love that Wrigley's extra ad. It really does sum up, I suppose, some of the emotion that people feel in that. So, and it is pervasive across all age groups and that. It's interesting, the younger ones a little bit less, even though they've been more impacted, and some of that is a fear of what the future will hold, the unemployment, the prospects, work future, will it all be clinical? How will it look in the future, and these are highly social people missing sociability, and what will that look like in the future? So there is an unknown there, and there is a need for guidance from many parts of society for the youth. Despite a yearning for things to go back to normal, it has become clear to us that, I suppose, normal wasn't necessarily working perfectly. A lot of us were never at home. There was a vote for change because we weren't happy in terms of society and the various aspects of, that were evident at the time. There was a climate crisis and that. And so going back to normal doesn't feel like the right aspiration necessarily in that. In a sense, what we now want is the best of both worlds, by retaining some of the positive aspects of lockdown. And about 59% of people don't want everything to go back. They will use this opportunity to make some changes. So they want that sense of deeper bonding, they want it, those life experiences, seeing the kids, dinner time, and so forth, and that, that connection with nature. There's been a real appreciation of what is around us, but we've just never taken notice. So that bigger picture aspect, and we have now a case study of how to affect behavioral change as well, if we put our mind to it and that in terms of social collaboration and that. So there's an opportunity to start over and in a sense to do it better. And that's the sort of zeitgeist that's sort of there at the moment in that. And look, that 59%, essentially they want a reduction in the pace of life. It's very hectic for them. There's a poor work-life balance. You know, they'll do more as the exercise, you know, appreciating nature, but also the environmental sort of side of things. And indeed, our work-life balance in terms of where we work, where we study, and in terms of that. So it's about driving change around a better quality and pace of life, the appreciation of what's around us, and also embracing, I suppose, health and indeed, I suppose, where we work and how we structure our lives in the future. And that quite profound in a way. But if you think about it in practical terms, it has huge implications for us as organizations and brands, you know, where people will consume, how they will consume, what they will consume, and who they will consume with that. Just, I suppose, the other aspect we're seeing as well is that human needs and human, new perspectives have sort of been exposed and that within the pandemic and that. So essentially, we've had to adjust to changing circumstances. So what we need and what is really important is become clearer on that. Yeah. I suppose one of the defining aspects is of the pandemic is how it is basically continued to disrupted, I suppose, our habits. And it is this disruption to our habits that has exposed, I suppose, our core human needs. And in other words, through disruption, what is really important and what do we really need in our lives has come clear to us, you know. And we can look at, I suppose, human needs on a spectrum here, you know, from those which are more individualistic to those which are more social, and the need for control versus the need for release and sort of expression. And we start at the bottom left-hand quadrant in that. We see the pandemic has highlighted the need for some form of structure to our lives. We need punctuation points in our day to give us a sense of narrative and focus. For example, having a routine for a walk during the day, or a weekend trip to the park and that. And we think of ourselves as like a spontaneous individuals, exciting individuals, but actually we need a sense of rhythm in our lives and that, and that has been very much exposed. The other point is that the pandemic has highlighted how the need for progress and growth is innate within us. You know? I suppose with many of our, I suppose, avenues for progress and achievement and indeed growth shut down over the pandemic, we found new ways, I suppose, to progress and challenge ourselves throughout our lives and that. So we took to the kitchens, we took up new hobbies, renewed old ones as well. And we sought out even the little challenges to keep us going, and the steps on our phones and everything else would be a classic example of that. The most obvious need that emerged was that at our core, we have a need for relationships. At our core, we are social animals. And, you know, and people, since we've been able to meet up again, people have started to tell us about the renewed sense of energy they have. It's, you know, it's become very obvious to us that relationships are not just for entertainment, but they're actually critical for our well-being. And lastly, we've collaborated as a society over the last year. The pandemic has highlighted our need to and our ability to collaborate towards a shared goal. It has highlighted, I suppose, the importance of care in the broader sense. And I said this, I suppose, maternal need to look after people and to do it right is critical in that. And I suppose with this new sense of clarity and perspective, we are all assessing, I suppose, priorities and what is important to us as we emerge from the pandemic. We don't want to necessarily go back to normal, but we want to hold on to some elements of this new perspective, which we've sort of gained in our lives. So we're reassessing our priorities. What are some of the new definitions? We switch on to that. One is a new definition around work, the reality of work and that. And for other research, we saw that over half of people would prefer working from home of those who are working in that, with 20% probably not in that, you know, and a little bit higher amongst obviously millennials and that. Yeah. And what do we miss? You know, we miss, I suppose, in our work the social aspect, which is not surprising given the needs we talked about in that. So we miss our work colleagues in that. Now we want is the best of both roles. We want to work from home a few days a week from now on, essentially. And that's a little bit even stronger amongst the younger versus the older cohorts of the workforce. But the interesting thing is in this dynamics is we start to pick this. So what we'll have is some hybrid, yeah? And how that will work, we'll talk a little bit about later on, is quite challenging for businesses and for people in that. So it'll be a suck and see a little bit. But it has found ramifications. Other industries will be impacted. We will make use of technology to cut down on business travel in the future. That has profound implications for us, in certain organizations. So 72% would agree with that. And I think the key thing is the central workplace that we return to is unlikely to be the one that we left last March. Also, it will impact other businesses, business travel, but also food, coffee to go. So, for example, if we have an extra 1 or 2 days working from home for certain businesses and that, where will they have their sandwiches, have their coffee? Where will they have those sort of meetings and that? Will they be buying from local? Will it be supermarkets as opposed to convenience stores? There's a range of different elements there that are at play in that. And if you think about it, this is going to probably impact Dublin probably a little bit more, and it's going to impact middle-class cohorts a lot more, as they tend to work from home a lot more than more blue-collar cohorts of society. The other new tradition is the shift to total wellness. Look, the mental health has become a mainstream issue over the last number of years. Anyway, it was one of the top priorities, but mental health has become truly mainstream now, and especially at the younger age group, if you can see that, and we're allocating more time to our self-care as well, reducing stress and so forth. So it's a real shift in our attitude to health and our openness in terms of how we can manage self-care and that into the future. And interesting, when you did a poll for RT in terms of the next normal last year, mental health was in vying with actually the economy as one of the top issues and top priorities they felt for society, which is quite profound. We had never seen that before in that. And just tapping into that self-care, it's about total wellness as the kind, as in this particular company of Fay Street in terms of was talking about it. Self-care is big this year, given everything that we are going through. I realize that actually what my brand is about is being kind to your mind, your body, and your planet. You can't just be kind to the planet. It doesn't exist on its own. So it's more about that holistic view of health into the future. Deep dive into the home. So the home has become more important than that. And Jesus, thank God for technology. That's all I like to say. Spare a poor thought for the 1918 people that in terms of the Spanish flu, in terms of that particular pandemic and what they had to go through. Obviously, we had Netflix and indeed other streaming and obviously linear TV and everything else that was radio that was there at our fingertips. Look, we've seen a growth in streaming, Netflix, but in particular Amazon Prime and Disney Plus, and we'll have a TechScape report out in a month that'll highlight the actual the incident levels of this and the growth of those podcasts, use of digital banks, Revolution, etc., all coming to fruition and that. And indeed, we've seen in other research that broadband's becoming even more important than roads for about half the population and that. But just if we go a little bit deeper in terms of our phone, our home and that, what behaviors in the house are we seeing in that and in the home and that? Well, people are structuring and creating separating spaces essentially to keep themselves sort of sane in that, So, without clear boundaries between work and leisure, they just develop ways of segmenting the day and indeed the spaces and that. So these are actual pictures that people took in terms of research on that. So the physical separation. So we have people building or carving out specific space in terms of home office and home working and everything else. We're also seeing this mental separation, which is kind of interesting. This is a lady whereby she was essentially lighting a candle when it was work time, and then lit a separate candle when work was over to delineate the day and to create some structure in her life and with various other aspects of that coming through. So using, I suppose, the sensory cues as well as physical ones to create boundaries and structure in our lives and that. And also we see then a real bending of the rules, be it the kids' game systems in the rooms and a growth of that in terms of with children and that. But some way of bending the rules, creating space and maximizing, I suppose, the environment around us to get through this into the future and that, So what can we say about the future? And there's some things which are more certain versus more likely to that, a little bit more fluid in that. Certainly what we're seeing is there will be a multifunctional spaces. Our homes will continue to play multiple roles in the future and that, you know, and we'll have to adjust our homes for this, you know. The importance of, I suppose, the visual element of our homes, so how that's enhanced. So we're seeing, I suppose, people painting, doing up their homes a lot more. Pictures, dare I say, the B&A prints, throws on the sofa, etc. So having that, you know, is more important. You know, having that sense of comfort and I suppose increased appreciation that we have for our homes, and that will endure into the future of that. And then again, the boosting social side of that. So people will, you know, essentially have more consideration of using their home as a socialization place in the future. So it will be more prominent in the consideration set. Yes, we will want to go back and socialize out within pubs and restaurants and everything else, but there will be more prominent consideration in terms of using our home, that because we've actually invested, as you see there, one guy actually invested in a bar, for example, and other equipment of that. So it's not just a temporary solution. We are thinking about and designing our homes for a different future as we move forward in that. So talking a little bit about products and brands, just in terms of objects of desire. So we ask people to photograph essentially what they purchased and why and that, you know. And so with many experiences out of reach and that, people have indulged in premium, I suppose, consumer durables and that. So everything from, I suppose, coffee making machines to Dyson hairdryers to wine fridges and so forth and that. So really an increase in terms of objects of desire and purchasing of these and that over this period to help us to get through this. But having that premiumization of products and that. And what does, I suppose, you know, that does beg the question, I suppose, what's going on here in terms of the psychology of it, you know? So from a psychological perspective, what we're seeing is, I suppose, a move to self-gifting on one side, from me to me. So at the moment, it's easier for us to rationalize the cost of big ticket items. You know, for example, it makes sense to spend €100 on a pair of Ugg slippers because you wear them all the time and that. But there's also been a jump in the amount of laddering up of behavior in terms of our day-to-day purchasing. You know, we've made so many sacrifices in other areas of our lives that we're willing to spend just a little bit more on more expensive things. So be it that expensive bottle of wine or that better cut of meat in that, you know. So, you know, they don't feel guilty about doing that anymore, and that's important. And also, one of the other big themes before the pandemic was how we were engaging with products and services that delivered some form of social currency. You know, so despite, I suppose, not being able to secure the social currency as frequently or as easily as so many of our experiences have been removed, people are finding ways to source it and that. So we mightn't be, you know, involved with other people in terms of talking and displaying it and that, but we're still accessing that sort of social currency through this particular avenue. That we want that sense of discernment and that, as people have said there. And the other aspect here as well is the other psychological dimension is that we've grown, essentially we become more considered when we're purchasing and that, yeah. So in other words, people have become more aware of their individual spending power and have become more cognizant of who they're spending with. And so they're spending a little bit more mindfully. Yeah? People are talking about the local economy or my local economy, and they've actually enjoyed giving back, you know. There's almost a sense of duty, you know, in terms of purchasing locally, in terms of local purchase decisions, but people are getting a kick out of it as well. They're getting an emotional hit for doing it as well, and that. So there's a real enjoyment aspect to it and that, which makes that so much more powerful. And the social contract between business and consumers evolved during the pandemic as well. Consumers want to see brands having good intentions and that, so pure empathy, not manufactured. Being able to, I suppose, read, I suppose, the social zeitgeist and stay in step with it has become crucial for businesses and indeed comms teams as well in that. And we're scrutinizing source as well. This is an accelerated trend. You know, consumers are considering the source of products more. We want to know more about when, where, and how our products are made. And in the early stages of 2021, there was actually an aversion, you know, for buying from UK businesses online. Again, more Brexit impact on that. But again, querying about when they will arrive or how they would arrive in them. So the overarching, I suppose, theme here is that consumers have a highly holistic perspective when buying. They're considering far more than just individual value that a product delivers. There's lots of other factors such as local ecosystems, the social contract, and the source, and the overall story, which are basically impacting the decision making on that. And I suppose one of the final aspects of this element is that, you know, there's a need to elevate the relationship. In I suppose, an increasing virtual world, delivering emotional hits to consumers is more important than ever. In a world which is seamless, I suppose, becoming a key customer need, you know, and you know, essentially ensuring that customers continue to feel your brand through their experience is more important than ever. There's a lovely quote here from The Blind Pig. So each bag is individually iron stamped with individually iron stamped cork coasters. They are getting a candle in each bag because we generally figure that most people who are coming to us are couples who are going on dates. Just a small little gesture to know, you know, setting the atmosphere, turn the lights down like you have your own place. When we talked to Jim and Coffee, it was about the importance of walking the talk, getting healthy with them. So actively involving themselves in the customer experience in that. And we have to remember that over half of people have started to buy products online that they didn't buy online before the pandemic and that. So maintaining some connection with customers through innovation and creativity will be a priority as we move out of this. So sustainability, just a quick aspect of this before I sum up. The emotional guilt has lifted a little, yeah? So, you know, yes, people are still extremely concerned about the environment, as we can see that there, but they're just a little bit less top of mind. And what is going on here is essentially people have a finite capacity to worry. When we become more worried about one threat, it can simultaneously decrease worry about other threats and that. So it is still very much prominent up there. It's just dropped back a little bit, and we just need to be conscious that it will come back as things settle back again. So it is. So where are we at the moment? It's essentially, it's a unique moment in time. Some habits have been reset. There's greater visibility out there that was started with the Australian bushfires, we'd argue. The Himalaya mountains then reinforced that in terms of their visibility and that. And then there's a sense of what is possible to collective. So as we emerge from the pandemic, there's a window of opportunity, we feel, to restart sustainability. The new social contract is of growing importance, and I don't think we can ignore that. Okay, post-COVID behavior, and then we'll sum up. I'm not going to go through all the stats on this chart, but just what we wanted to do was here, we took a limited set of behaviors to illustrate that some behaviors will revert, some will change from pre-pandemic, and some will not be as extreme as during the pandemic. So what we're seeing and what is likely to happen is essentially a blended behavioral set as we emerge in that. So pre-pandemic, for example, limited working from home, for example. During the pandemic, it rose up, yeah? We stopped socializing, stopped commuting to some extent, low holidays, low visiting city centers, low public transport and everything else. Post-pandemic, what we're seeing, I suppose, a couple of things, reverting back to type in terms of socialization, hopefully in that, going back in terms of holidays, holding, I suppose, that taking exercise and appreciation of what we've held and what we've learned throughout the pandemic and that, but going back to a little bit more commuting, not as much maybe working from home, but we will still be working from home and that, and we will be taking transport, but a little bit of concern around some of those aspects. Maybe not buying as much groceries online, but buying other things online and that coming through and that. So it's a blend is what we're seeing into the future in that. And a classic is the Zoom calls. So for example, before pandemic, very low in terms of video communications. Pandemic went up and we're settling back in here as we see in terms of 28% of that. So it's about that. And then to sum up, we can see the key things which we're going to do more, less of, and that which I just was mentioning there. So it's that blended reality is what we're going to see as we move out. So just to finalize some parting thoughts for everybody, and then we can open to questions. The first thing is the pandemic is far from over. I suppose our future behavior and our attitudes are likely to be shaped by how the crisis is managed over the next 12 to 18 months, as it is by the experiences over the last year and that. We have some road to go yet. History repeats for the political landscape. So Traditional politics has been on hold. The gloves are coming off now. You know, and people feel history is repeating itself a little bit. There's an inequality and that's widening. There's lost livelihoods. There's some significant savings there. There's an exacerbation of the housing crisis. There's an accentuation of the differences in the public health service and that. So a lot of things, yes, it's around housing and that, which were, I suppose, issues of the last general election, are still around in that. And they're actually all coming back. You know, they haven't gone away. So we're a long way out from the next election, but these issues are likely to impact the outcome. We're in a time of cautious release, we would argue. There's rising consumer confidence, which is fantastic. We have an increase in household wealth in that. There's a reopening of the economy in that. But people are nervous and they're willing to be a little bit more pragmatic and cautious in terms of the spend. But they also need a little bit of a splurge in that. And the media will play a role in that. You know, there's reports of unemployment levels of higher than the 80s and that are in line with the 80s and that will reinforce that pragmatism. And there's a grumblings at the moment as who's going to pay for all of this. So that's the sort of next stage. Essentially, the ability to be mobile is key to consumer spending. So if we're mobile and we can move around, that's the key to consumer spending in the long term. And we have to remember that there's a lot of talk about, oh, everything's changed. A lot of the changes has happened. It's been an acceleration of many pre-COVID trends. So the continuing prioritize of technology and stream channels of interaction with products and services. The flexibility of working and community, the sustainability and social contract expectations, the openness to, I suppose, discussing and managing health with a move to total wellness and that. And it has ripple effects as well. So we know about online shortcomings. We know what we like and dislike about Zoom and everything else and that and online purchasing and that. So there'll be a blended world of online and face-to-face in the future. Uber convenience will be important. We've got used to many things such as online delivery and flexibility in terms of deliveries, local deliveries and everything else of that. So it'll be that blended world in the future. We'll have a reimagining of our cities and indeed where we live, and new workplaces and commercial property reappraisal as well. And we'll be exploring, I suppose, our creative side to get more out of life from that. Yeah? So it will be that blended world. And just the final part is what's the implications of as a starter for brands, just to give people pause for thought. A lot of habits will come back. So don't, we would feel, get sucked into just looking for new things. It will be a blend. There's phenomenal, there's opportunity for phenomenal offline customer experience. So despite the importance of the online, the physical experience of being somewhere, so the actual, the physical stimuli, the sensory elements in that, the moods, the smells, the sensations will be very important, and getting that physical ambience right as COVID retreats will be critical in that. Emotional brand building connections will inspire. You know, get creative juices flowing. How to drive engage in emotional and local connections in a digital world will be the challenge. There's a warning here, just banging on about emotion or slapping on, I suppose, that generic John Lewis trope to any brand can easily backfire, and as consumers have this antennae to that faux emotionality in that. Will the old reliables be thrown out in an exciting seeking movement as we emerge? Some have found aspects of the pandemic life strangely comforting. And in this, I suppose, contentment can be reflected in brands such as cautious and risk-reducing behavior can actually have this feeling of security. So they can actually feel that sense of security by certain brands and that in terms of those reliabilities. So again, thinking about all aspects. Trust is, we feel, is going to be more important as an organizational value at many levels: quality, privacy, service, and etc. And in tandem with this, we feel that purpose-driven brands will resonate. Have you a credible sustainability message? So not just greenwashing and that into the future. And I suppose the final parting thought is that when I look back in 2010, that report on the economic collapse at the time, and we found that people eventually were getting on with it. Simply can only say shocked or angry for so long. They find a way, and they need support along that sort of journey into the future. Bit of a whistle stop tour, but I'll stop now for questions.
Luke, thanks very much. That was excellent. Some really wake-up calls there, but ending on a positive note. Find a way out of these things. I've a question for you, and it relates to that chart you put up on new definitions, the reality of work. There were many alarming points throughout the survey. Can I draw your attention to the article by Jennifer O'Connell in the Irish Times when she interviewed Peter Cosgrove of FutureWise? on the issue of a hybrid model of remote and office working when all of this is over. And according to Jennifer, Peter said, people are going to go into work more than we think. Every study has always said the further you are from the head office, the less chance you have of being promoted. And some organizations, there will be a policy that you can work from home 2 days a week, but the unwritten rule will be, don't do it. It will be career suicide. Have you any views on that? It's quite scary and alarming.
Yeah, and I think we have to think about human nature, out of sight, out of mind. And that's one of the key things I think that article is alluding to, and that's just the nature of humans, you know. So that is a real worry. The other aspect is that if we look at the population of businesses, 90% of businesses have less than 10 employees, you know, and if half of them are not in the office, you know, 2 days a week, it's a very desolate place. So how that actually, or is that practical at all in a business context and that? So we have to, I think, understand, I suppose, the dynamics of our structure of businesses. So for large organizations, it's one thing, but for smaller organizations, it's different to that. Yeah, and that. And I think it will be a bit of suck it and see. And I think we're seeing at the moment, I know we're seeing drifting back to the workplace already. And we're seeing that at a good pace in that. But that is a real challenge for companies and, I suppose, employees to navigate in the future, and how they can remain visible when they're at home and that. And it's a sort of a mindset sort of change, you know, and I'll be honest, it's not going to be easy for anybody.
Yeah. I don't see any questions coming through as yet, Luke, so I think we're going to call it. Mm-hmm. I just want to thank you and your colleagues within Behaviour and Attitudes for the survey and for agreeing to share this at the AI Toolkit webinar. As long as B&A continue to produce these surveys, there will always be an invitation to share and present these at our seminars. It's truly remarkable work. For the participants, this is our last webinar as we will break for the summer period. We'll be back again in action again next September. Thanks to all of you who participated this morning, and I hope you have a great summer and have a good week. Thanks again, Luke. Take care.
You're very welcome. Thank you.